Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. From now through May 6th, if you use that promo code, you will automatically be entered into a drawing to win a War of the Spark booster box. See the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today we have more War of the Spark previews to take a look at, and we have a lot of cards today, so I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit. If you're curious to find out the source of any of these cards, check out the description below. It's all listed there. Without any further ado, let's go. Before we get to the new cards, there was a card that was revealed yesterday that Wizards had to make a correction to. That's Tulsimir, Friend to Wolves. The mock-up of the card that they put out actually had that second ability as a May ability. In reality, it is not a May ability. You have to fight with your wolf. So just keep that in mind. Maybe it makes the card a tad bit worse than we said it was yesterday due to the fact that you don't have that decision in your hands anymore, but this is still an amazing card. Defiant Strike. This one's a reprint. This is more for your limited game. It's not all that exciting. I mean, it's cheap and it does cantrip, which I do like, but this is one of those cards that I think is here basically because they're trying to push the instant and sorcery theme a little bit in this set. We have seen some cards that care about instants and sorceries. We've seen other ones that care about non-creature spells generally. If you're all in on that type of strategy, then this might be worth playing some of the time. Graful Apparition. This is very reminiscent of Thrumming Bird, which was a good card in the limited environment back in the day. This one is maybe a little bit better because if you do damage to a player or planeswalker, you get to proliferate, so that's pretty cool. It has evasion. It's a little fragile being a 1/1 for 2. But if you really care about proliferate in this limited environment, you'll run this card and be happy with it. Loxodon Sergeant. Another card that's more for the draft and sealed game, but it's a decent one. A 3/3 for 4 is pretty much on par for what you're going to find in limited and feel comfortable with. This also has vigilance, and until end of turn, other creatures you control have vigilance. So occasionally it could lead into a big turn, but even if it doesn't, a 3/3 vigilance creature for 4 is very serviceable. Makeshift Battalion. You know, I'm not usually a fan of the 3/2s for 3 because they do trade down for 2 drops a lot of the time, but this one has a pretty good ability. It's not always going to be 100% consistent for you, but I do think many of the times you're going to be able to play this on turn 3 or turn 4, attack in shortly after, and this will attack in as a 4/3. That's not bad for what you paid for it. Yes, it requires some board presence, of course, for this to be good. Maybe more so if I'm playing Boros colors or something like that, but I think it's a decent limited card. Tomik, Distinguished Advokist. This is a very solid rare. Let's talk limited first. Now, you're not going to see it all the time being rare, but if I were to first pick this, I would not be sad. It is 2 on color, sure, but it is a 2 casting cost 2/3 flyer. Even if I read nothing else, that's actually kind of awesome. What about standard? Could it see play there? Well, yeah, it could fit into a mono white aggro deck and maybe even be pretty good there. But I'm also very interested in the fact that this is a really cheap legendary creature that has decent stats. Because, remember, back in Dominaria, we had cards that interact with legendary creatures and planeswalkers, and maybe some of those cards could get a little bit better in the standard format now that this exists. A lot of the excitement, though, around this card is going to come from players who play Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. This is a pretty big hate card that could be even main deckable, especially in a lot of Vintage and Legacy decks, things like Death and Taxes, for example, just simply because you know you're going to have matchups where this is going to be good. Lands decks and Legacy is an example of that. Some of the Dredge builds. In Modern, you don't see Life from the Loam as much as you used to in Dredge builds, although it still shows up sometimes. But you will definitely find that card in Vintage and Legacy doing things. So that alone is a good reason maybe to try to run this card in those formats. Also, on the flip side, this could be used to protect land strategies too. Now, another place you might want to play this card, of course, is Commander. This could simply protect your lands, or it could hose another deck, like a Lord Windgrace deck, for example. Also, I don't know if this will come into play, but it is an advisor. Maybe you could play it alongside Persistent Petitioners. Tons of utility here. There's going to be a lot of crossover interest in this card. Rescuer Sphinx. I like this card a lot for draft and sealed, and, you know, I wish it had flash, sure. It's always nice when you can kind of spring these type of abilities on your opponent, protect one of your things, get it back to your hand, and save it. However, in this case, you can still find a lot of strong things to do with this card. For example, maybe I have one of these uncommon planeswalkers, I ticked it down a little bit, it's not doing much anymore. I can play this, get a 3/2 flyer for 4, with a +1/+1 counter, making it 4/3, return that planeswalker to my hand, replay it, and it will get a loyalty reset. That's not bad, that's one thing you could do with it. Or you could simply bounce a creature with a good enters or leaves the battlefield effect for value. Regardless, when you bounce a non-land permanent, you get a +1/+1 counter on this, which works very well into the proliferate strategies that we're seeing, especially for blue and green. You know, even if you don't bounce anything, a 3/2 flyer for 4 can still be fine and limited. Sometimes you just need the evasion. Stealth Mission, and here's another card that will put some +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. Nothing wrong with that in this set, like I just said. Also, it's going to make something unblockable that turn, so if you are in a board stall, this could push you ahead in a game. That happens very often, especially in sealed games. So in draft or sealed, I could see myself running one of these. Kind of wish it was an instant so you could use it as a combat trick. Unfortunately, you can't. It's a sorcery, but it still might be good enough to work one into your deck, or at least side it in if you're in a grindy matchup. Aid the Fallen. This is going to get a creature and or planeswalker out of your graveyard back into your hand for just 2 mana, sorcery speed though. This is going to be good for you in draft or sealed. You know you're going to be playing a lot of creatures. Hopefully you're playing at least a fair amount of planeswalkers, even if it is some of the uncommon ones. And if that's the case, being able to find value later in the game by taking 2 of those cards back to your hand, it's almost like a draw spell. I would even argue if you had some bomb creature or maybe one of the really good planeswalkers, it would be worth basically exchanging this card for that card in your graveyard. For 2 mana, I'm going to run this in draft or sealed and be pretty happy with it most of the time. Massacre Girl. This has to be some kind of homage to Hit Girl from Image Comics, right? I would assume. Anyway, this is actually pretty decent. First off, a 4/4 menace creature for 5. Nothing wrong with that. But look at this ability. Basically, this is a creature-based board sweep under a lot of circumstances for black. So when it enters the battlefield, everything gets -1/-1 except itself. Now, if something dies, then everything gets another -1/-1. So let's say your opponent has a 1/1, a 2/2, and a 3/3. You play this, the 1/1 dies, and then the 2/2 dies, and then the 3/3 dies. Okay, that's pretty cool, but that might not always work out, right? But if somebody's playing a white weenie deck or a mono red aggro deck with a lot of small creatures, this could really put them back. So I do think this will see standard play. Maybe it's going to be out of the sideboard. I don't think all control decks are going to want to play this over Kaya's Wrath. However, I do think under certain circumstances, this makes a lot of sense, most likely out of the board, though. It's also kind of cool that this sticks around on the battlefield to threaten the ability again. Obviously, it is a bomb and sealed in draft. Just remember this card is immune to the ability, but other creatures you control are not, so pick your spots. Blind Blast. This is another draft or sealed card that I might be interested in if I care about how many instant sorceries or not creature spells I'm playing. It's a cantrip, it's a little expensive. I like that it can create a situation where a certain creature can't block. Again, if you're in a board stall, that might help you out later in the game. But I'll be honest, if I'm not all in on caring about instant sorceries or not creature spells, I'm probably not going to run this one. I don't think it does enough for 3 on its own. It is kind of nice that it's an instant, though. Cyclops Electromancer. I'll play this in draft or sealed if I have a lot of instants and sorceries. Maybe I'm in the Izzet colors or something like that. If I don't have a fair amount of them, though, I'm going to skip this one. A 4/2 for 5, those are not very good stats. That is going to trade down quite massively sometimes, and you don't want that. You really want the ability to do something if you play this. And if you're only doing like 1 or 2 damage, it's just not worth it. Devouring Hellion, kind of a callback to the Devour mechanic. This time you can sack planeswalkers as well as creatures, though, and for anything you sacrifice, this will get 2 +1/+1 counters. This is interesting, a 2/2 for 3, but the ability is kind of nice. Potentially this could be a larger creature, of course, and you might find yourself in situations in draft or sealed where you have some of these uncommon planeswalkers that are just sitting around not doing a whole lot anymore, and it would be nice to turn them into +1/+1 counters for a creature. Well, this creature will allow that to happen. Or if you have smaller creatures or tokens that aren't really doing anything at the given time, you can kind of put all your eggs in one basket and go tall. That's dangerous, though, sometimes, remember, because your opponent might have an easier time dealing with one big creature over a lot of small creatures. And if they have a removal spell, you might have just blown yourself out, and that's not necessarily where you want to be, right? So be thoughtful when you use this card. I'm not going to say you shouldn't use it, but just be really careful with it and examine the board state very closely. Now, it doesn't have evasion. That's going to be another issue with this card. You might have a big dumb creature, but it might not be doing anything for you. However, it does have +1/+1 counters. And again, with Proliferate out there, that could make the card a little bit better in some builds. This can be a decent draft or sealed card. Just be careful with it. Goblin Assailants. If you watch this video, you know what I like. I like bears. I like bears with upside a little bit better, but I like grizzly bear type creatures in limited because they're just good curve fillers. Sometimes you just need a 2/2 for 2. And if you got better 2-drops, maybe you'll have some with some abilities that are still 2/2s, then go for it. But if you need this card, it's there for you. Goblin Assault Team. This one's not bad. A 4/1 haste for 4. Now, usually I would say that's a little fragile. However, when it dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So again, it plays into the proliferate strategy. And also, you're still getting something for it. So let's say I play this for 4. I attack in. My opponent blocks it with like a 1/1 or 2/2. Well, I took out one of their creatures and I'm still getting the +1/+1 counter, hopefully, on something else. That's not too bad. Obviously, if you're running a more controlling build with a lot of instants and sorceries, you might skip this card, but I think a lot of red decks, especially red-white, might be interested in this. I'd at least want to test it in Standard. It's one of those cards that feels like it shouldn't be all that good, but it might surprise you. Maybe throw this in a mono-red aggro deck that has a little proliferate in it or something like that. Heartfire. This is a good limited removal spell. It's instant speed. Yes, you do have to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. But in limited, I don't think that's going to be tough to do all that often. I mean, sometimes it will back you into a corner, or sometimes you'll draw this in an empty board state and it won't feel good. But most of the time, I think you'll be just fine. 4 damage to any target is quite sizable. The only way I see this doing much in Standard is if we do get some kind of like mono red aggro deck that's running a lot of tokens or something out there in the future. Then maybe it could see a little play. A card like Lava Coil outclasses this in a lot of ways, but it is not an instant and it can't go to the face. Our next card comes to us from a Japanese language preview, and it is a vehicle. It is also a vehicle with color identity, so that's new. Mizium Tank, loosely translated. This is kind of decent if you have a lot of non-creature spells in your deck. It feels like red is definitely interested in that in this set. So the way this works is I could crew 1 it, and that's actually pretty affordable. But if I do that, it's only a 3/2 with trample. That's not too exciting. But if I cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn and becomes an artifact creature until the end of turn. So that way I don't have to crew it. If I play a few cheap spells, now this thing becomes maybe a 4/3 trample, 5/4 trample. In draft or sealed, I could occasionally have some big turns with it. And I do think if you have enough non-creature spells in your deck, you should definitely run this. If you don't have a lot, if you're more of a creature-based deck, again, maybe Boros or something, then I would probably skip it because crewing it isn't going to feel all that good. When it comes to Standard, yeah, there are decks that run a lot of cheap spells, like is it Drake or is it Phoenix? I don't know if adding this would dilute the core of those decks too much, but it would at least be worth testing. Band Together. I like the theme of today, which is basically, for the most part, the cards we've been looking at have shown us all of the guilds coming together to fight back. I think that's really cool. And this is a good draft or sealed card. You know, a lot of times when it comes to green removal, it is a little conditional, a little situational. This card is no exception to that, but I think it's pretty good. 3 casting cost instant, up to 2 target creatures. So if you only have 1 creature, you're still okay. That 1 creature can deal damage based on its power. This will be better if you have 2, though, obviously. You'll run this many times and be happy with it. Maybe this is a removal spell that you can pick up in the middle of a draft pack. Bleore Hulk. Another theme of this set I've noticed is crazy good commons and uncommons. 4 for 4, so we're already kind of above par when it comes to stats for draft or sealed to begin with, and then when this enters the battlefield, proliferate. So worst case scenario, you got a 4 for 4. Best case scenario, wow, you could have, 8 power toughness being added to the battlefield or something like that, just based on how many +1/+1 counters might be out there. Then also, if you have any planeswalkers, you could be adding loyalty counters to them. This is awesome. Considering it's a common, this is a fantastic card. Yes, you are going to play this in draft and sealed when you get a chance. I could see myself first picking this in some packs, maybe. It feels that strong to me. Now for Standard, I think this actually does see Standard play. The Simic Ascendancy deck is getting a big push with cards from this set. This is another card that could fit in there. Merfolk decks maybe to a lesser extent with this card, although Merfolk decks care about +1/+1 counters. Maybe you could test it out in one of those builds. Also, this is a common, remember. You can try this out in Pauper. And we already know about the popular strategies in Commander that have been around for many years that revolve around +1/+1 counters or loyalty counters and proliferate. So this is another card that could fit into an Atraxa deck, for example. Courage in Crisis, another card that cares about proliferate and counters, although this one's a little more expensive and it's a sorcery. It feels a tad slow for Standard to me, but I do think it could still be good in some draft or sealed builds. If you care about +1/+1 counters and proliferate, this is a fine card. Maybe it's for some of the Simic builds out there. This next card comes to us from a French language preview, and it is Evolution Sage. This is excellent. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Alright, a very simple phrase, but also could be very powerful. Here's the drawback. 3 casting cost 3/2. It's very fragile. By the time you're at the point you're playing 3 drops, there's a lot of things that can destroy this. Even Shock will take this thing out. So if you play this in Standard, it's probably not going to live long, but I don't know if that's always a problem. The raw power here makes me still want to try it out, maybe in a Simic Ascendancy build or something like that. Also, we've been trying to figure out what to do with Scapeshift. Well, maybe you could play this card, Scapeshift, the new Nissa that was leaked a few days back. They do have some synergy together. Something to at least consider when you're trying to come up with a new brew. Ultimately, I do think this could see a little Standard play, even though it does have the low toughness. Drafter Sealed, this is going to be a build around uncommon. Something you might even consider first picking some of the time and then just trying to go Simic and grab all the +1/+1 counters things, grab some Planeswalkers, and you could be having a pretty good day. Don't even get me started on Commander. I mean, all sorts of decks will want to try this out. Atraxa is the first one to come to mind, of course, but there's a lot of decks that would like to try this out, I think. Even if you're just running a lot of Planeswalkers, you could find value here. Pollen Bright Druid. Okay, now we're back to a card that I feel like could have an impact on Standard. Now let's talk Limited first. Worst case scenario, I got myself a 2/2 for 2. I pay the 2, it's a 1/1, I put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, that could be this creature. You know I'm going to be happy with a 2/2 for 2, right? Later in the game, this could get a lot better. Maybe I have creatures with +1/+1 counters, maybe I have Planeswalkers out there with loyalty counters. All of a sudden, this little 2-drop 1/1 is bringing me a lot of power and toughness and maybe some more loyalty to the battlefield. That could really get out of hand in the right board state. This is another common I would pick pretty high in a draft pack. In a Standard, again, all the decks I mentioned earlier, Simic Ascendancy, Merfolk would like this because it is cheaper, also Pauper, attracts a commander. There's a lot of possibilities for this one. Mayhem Devil, another type of deck that might be getting a push from this set, looks like Mardu Aristocrats. Could this be a part of that deck? Well, maybe, but one thing I want to point out. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, this will deal 1 damage to any target. So it's not just when things die, it has to be something that is sacrificed. So, will there be a repeatable, easy-to-do sacrifice effect in this set? Maybe, maybe not. That feels like it could be a little too powerful in the environment, perhaps. But if you have enough ways to sacrifice things, even if it's just a one-off here or there, maybe this is worth your time, considering it's still a 3/3 for 3. This does have a shot at Standard play, depending on how things shake out. And in Limited, yeah, 3/3 for 3 with this ability, it will be just fine. Merfolk Skydiver. Okay, now not only do we have a card that is going to give a +1/+1 counter and perhaps proliferate, it's also a Merfolk. So let's talk Standard first. Throw this in your Merfolk deck. I think it's going to be good there. Bottom line is it's a 1/1 for 2, but not really, because again, it could be a 2/2 for 2 with flying. The Mana Sink Proliferate might be awesome in a Merfolk deck. It could be awesome in Simic Ascendancy. This card is going to be really solid with Hadana's Climb. I do think we will be seeing some shifts in the Standard meta once this set hits. In Limited games, a very economical creature and a Mana Sink that could get you past board stalls. What's not to like here? Neoform. This is an interesting one. I'm trying to wrap my head around it a little bit. A couple things you could do with it. First off, you could get a 1-drop, sack it, and go get Growth Chamber Guardian. That would be a pretty nice play. Another thing you could do is take a 1-drop, maybe a Llanowar Elf even, and then sacrifice that and move up to Incubation Druid with a +1/+1 counter on it. That could lead to some big mana turns, right? So I do think it's good. I'm curious as to how consistent it will be in Standard. I think when you have a couple combos like the ones I just mentioned, and there's probably more you can think of too, it could be consistent enough. So I do think there's a good chance it does see Standard play. When it comes to Limited, you do have to be careful because this could get awkward fast in a 40-card deck. For example, if you have a lot of 3-drops on the battlefield and you ran out of 4-drops in your deck, this could be a dead draw. However, if I have a really strong curve or I care a lot about +1/+1 counters and proliferate, I'm going to probably still try to run this. 10th District Legionnaire. This is a pretty cool Boros card. 2/2 haster for 2 in Limited. Sign me up. I'm happy to play that. And yes, it is 2 different colors. It might not always be a 2-turn play. Maybe it's a turn 3 play some of the time, but I'm still okay with that. And then whenever you cast a spell that targets this, put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1. That's pretty nice. Whether you're trying to put an aura on it or just a combat trick, you could find some value here. And your opponent's got to consider that if you're attacking in with open mana, they got to think about the possibilities. And that could lead to some favorable combat situations for you, even if you're just bluffing. For Standard, is it possible to see a Boros aggro deck with some pump and combat tricks in it? Yeah, maybe. I do think there's a better chance of seeing a stronger Boros aggro deck coming out of this set, just based on the cards we've seen so far. Iron Bully. I don't have a lot to say about this. I think it's just a really solid limited card. It costs 3 and it's 3 generic. It can fit into any deck. It has menace, so if you want to keep the pressure on planeswalkers, this card can help you do that. It gives a +1/+1 counter to a creature when it enters the battlefield, so it's at least coming in as a 2/2 worst case scenario, or it's at least giving that +1/+1 to something else, and it's a 1/1. But regardless, if you're playing with Proliferate, that could be good. Yeah, good, well-rounded card. Mobilize District. Never underestimate creature lands. I think this is going to be a real good one. So let's talk limited first. Now, if I'm going really deep on colors, maybe 3 or 4 colors, there could be an issue with me trying to make this part of my mana base, but that's okay. I could make it one of my playables if that's the case. But if I'm going maybe a even split of 2 colors, splashing a third or something, and I feel pretty comfortable in my base, I might be able to just make this part of the base, and wonderful, that's extra bonus value. Now, if I have legendary creatures or planeswalkers, then the activation cost is reduced, that's great, but if it's not even reduced all that much or not at all, it could still be pretty good as a 3/3 vigilance creature when I need it. Also, I could activate this ability, attack with the creature, because it has vigilance, I could still tap it for mana, that's kind of nice too. So outside of limited, does this actually see standard play? Oh, I'm sure it will. There's a lot of good board sweeps out there right now. Kaya's Wrath, for example, we saw another board sweep that is kind of attached to a creature today. There's enough reasons out there that maybe a control deck might want to play something like this. It's a land, you can use it for mana when you need to do the counter spells and all that good stuff. But later in the game, you have control of the board, you want to push a little damage across, and you don't want to necessarily have to rely just on Teferi. Here's your answer right here, and I think it is awesome. I think there's other decks outside of control that will appreciate this in standard as well. Get used to seeing this card. I think we're going to see a lot of it in the coming months. Alright, with that being said, that is our look at the cards for today. Now, tomorrow we're going to do our market watch. The weekend usually slows down for card previews, so if anything crazy comes out, I will do a special video. But if just small things come out, I'll just roll them into Monday's video. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.